Yeah.
Right.
That would be a safe
You assumed
bet
correctly.
Assumption. Into your website, listen to your podcast. You're not really religious. But if we do think, like I do, that people would be better off if they, gave up the ghost, so to speak, right, and stopped hanging on to religion, then we kind of have a responsibility to tell them how it's actually going to be okay. What does it actually look like when you live your life ethically, responsibly, and compassionately without supernaturalism? How does it actually work? Let's be explicit about it. Because a lot of people, I think, hold on to their beliefs because they're scared.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be easy. And the reality is, I've talked to a lot of people. The reality is grief without God is way easier than grief with God. Everything's easier. Like, everything's easier when you don't have this extra baggage that doesn't make any sense. And the more you understand how reality works, the easier it is to negotiate reality.
Sure. I find it's one less phone call you have to make when you're in a quandary. You call your mom, your dad, and your priest. Well, you just cut one phone call.
Right. Life is just a lot easier, and I don't think people that are holding on. There's a lot of people that are agnostic, not because they believe, but because they're afraid to not believe. And I think if we give them the landing platform to land on, we make it easier for them to just acknowledge, and it will be okay.
Well, I'm curious about. You just said grief is easier. I think it's common understanding that grief is easier with religion. The idea being that you kind of offload the permanence of death onto this supernatural idea that you're going to see the person you just lost again one day.
Yeah, but that's preventing people from accepting.
Certainly it is. Certainly it is. I mean, you're going to find no disagreement here.
Right. And there's no negotiating. You just accept it. What is the serenity prayer, right? Accepting what you can't change, having the courage to change what you can, and knowing the difference. Mm-hmm. And death is something you can't change. Not at the moment, anyways. We might be able to get there, but it's not going to be through God. It's going to be through science.
Mm-hmm.
So, I lost a child. And, we went through support groups for a while, and we ended up not needing them nearly as long as some other people did. But what I realized is, as bad as it was for me, my worldview wasn't thrown upside down by what had happened, like pretty much everybody else in these groups.
That is a very good point.
I wasn't, when you're not religious or you're humanist, it's like what Christopher Hitchens said when he got cancer, right? He's talking to Anderson Cooper. The question of why me, the answer to that is, well, why not me? Mm-hmm. There's nothing that protects me from being a statistic. I can alter the odds that I'll be a statistic, but I can't eliminate them.
Exactly.
And I think not that being okay with that just eliminates the, we didn't get angry at God. Mm-hmm. We didn't have any of that back. It was bad enough as it was not to have, why would anybody add extra layers to their grief when grief is already hard enough?
Yeah, so these events cannot test our faith when there's no faith to test. It's pretty much what you're saying.
Yeah. But when I lost my daughter, people in the humanist movement came out of the woodwork to comfort me, and I realized how many other people had lost children. And one of my friends, an older man, did grief support work, and he said, no, people of faith have a really, and Catholics really have the hardest time. In his experience as a grief counselor, Catholics have the hardest time with grief, and atheists have the easiest time with grief.
Really?
Not to say that it's easy, right?
Of course not. Of course not.
But just not having the extra baggage attached to your grief makes it that much easier to deal with.
Yeah, we're not stuck asking God why he's testing us.
Right. We're not negotiating with him either.
Uh-huh.
And we're not delaying our acceptance of reality, and we don't have any of that stuff going on. We just accept what we have to accept, as much as we might not like it, and move on with our lives.
Yeah, as a kid, I remember we had a family member pass away, and this was a family member who had fallen out of faith, wasn't very religious anymore. As far as my young mind remembers, there were rumors about him, taking to the bottle and, becoming a womanizer and all these. People were saying terrible things about him, but one day he dies from diabetes. And at this point, there are people in the family that are now worried about his immortality in hell. Like that becomes a part of the grieving. Like, oh God, now he's forfeited his place in the kingdom, and he'd be in hell now.
Oh yeah, and I think for people that come out, I was raised without religion, and but in an interfaith environment because my extended family's religious, Jewish on one side and Catholic on the other, and Orthodox Jewish and devout Catholic. Mm-hmm. So I was raised to respect people's choices about religion, but it's only since marrying my husband, that I've come across people who are of faith, who believe in heaven and hell, and are sad, not upset, but sad that they're not going to see me in heaven. And it's actually a compliment because they like me, mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. if they didn't like me, they wouldn't care if they saw me there or not. They're not the sort of people that would push their beliefs on me, and they haven't made an issue of it, but, they are saddened by it. And I think it's hard for people who are non-believers to really get that. They really believe in heaven and hell, and they really believe they're not going to see you there. Mm-hmm. That's hard for them to accept because the selling point is that death isn't final. I'm going to be able to see these people. It's less about them than about the people they want to see later. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned this twice, that you were raised as a humanist, although you didn't call it that, and
right.
that your parents were very good at kind of teaching what are these humanist lessons. Do you lay out that process in your book on how I have a young daughter who I'm trying to raise as a free thinker, on how I can kind of teach her the proper methods of free thought?
I have the second chapter. The first chapter is the introduction. This is the methodology, right? And then I have a chapter called The Rule of Threes, which teaches free thought. Now, you got to keep in mind this book is for teens and young adults. Because there is a chapter on sex in there, and I don't know that the average person wants their 10-year-old reading about dating and sex.
Right.
Their 13-year-old, oh yeah. But their 10-year-old, probably not.
Mm-hmm. My 4-year-old, no way.
Oh, exactly. But I do have a chapter about how to start practicing free thought if you haven't already been taught the Socratic method and things like that by your parents. Mm-hmm. My parents, my dad specifically, we were subjected to the Socratic method on just about everything.
Nice.
So, when I meet people, they're like, "Are you a lawyer? You think very critically." And I'm like, "Yeah, you can blame my dad for that."
Yeah, I find when you try the Socratic method with a 4-year-old, it just becomes question after question after question, and there's never an answer.
Well, that was more when we were teenagers and starting to become politically aware, and we'd take an opinion, and Dad would play the devil's advocate. I didn't know it was called the Socratic method at the time, but it's clearly what he was doing, right? And he didn't label it Socratic, but it's clearly the Socratic method, and it's very, very effective to teach critical thinking. If you don't have that ability around you, someone doing that for you to teach you that, what I do is the rule of threes, which is if you're trying to solve a problem, think of at least 3, maybe 4, maybe 7 reasons why that thing might be occurring, right? Mm-hmm. If you're trying to solve a problem, think of at least 3 possible solutions to that problem. Because just starting that process gets you out of the black and white thinking that we all tend to fall into.
Right.
And once you remember to think of at least 3, then you can think of at least 7 or 10 or 20, Mm-hmm. And it's really rare to come across a situation where it is black and white. It's not to say it doesn't happen, but it's kind of rare. And the example I give is, if you're trying to solve something, do you do A or B? Well, you could also always do A and B, or neither A or B, or there might be a C you hadn't considered yet. Mm-hmm. Even when just considering an A and B solution, I can come up with at least 3 more solutions to the problem, very simply. There might be a D or, whatever. Mm-hmm. So it's just a way to get people to start practicing, expanding their thinking. And the reason humanists and free thinkers do this is not because we like to be annoying.
We do,
although I do get a kick out of it. Okay.
Right, we get a kick out of it, but it's not because we want to be annoying. It's because literally this helps us solve our problems more effectively. And if you want to be happy, solving your problems more effectively is a really great way to start. So, the book isn't just, hey, let's think freely and why reality is better than supernatural when it comes to solving your problems. There's practical reasons, and those practical reasons are it's more effective at problem solving, period. And if you want to be effective, go with free thought and go with skepticism and rationality, because those are going to be your best tools for navigating through the world, because the better your understanding of reality is, the easier you're going to have negotiating reality. If you reject reality, you're going to have a really hard time, because reality doesn't like to be rejected. It will reassert itself at every corner.
Right.
So how do you go about teaching skepticism? Because, we can see skepticism run wild in the conspiracy theorist subset of skepticism. How do you manage that balance?
Well, if all you're going to do is be skeptical, then you're not really a skeptic. You're not being open-minded and free thought. The purpose of skepticism, I think this is what helps not let people go off the deep end and just rejecting everything. Like the vaccination problem, right? People are being skeptical, right? But they've forgotten that it's not enough to just say, to question things. The point is you're trying to find out what the truth is. All right, so
skepticism isn't the goal; it's more of a filter.
It's a filter through which you use to find out what reality is. And if that's not your objective, then skepticism is just as bad as blind faith at that point. Which is probably why skepticism has such a bad name. Is people don't necessarily put it in the positive context of solving a problem, using reality to solve a problem. And skepticism helps you weed out the claims. And the examples I use in the book are everything from, psychic surgery and vaccinations to, just how do you tell if a claim on television commercial is real or not?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Skepticism, do your research, find out what's real. And it's not enough to just look at the negatives. You also have to look at the positives and use your brain.
Right, and you can't fall into the trap of the conspiracy theorist and start making claims that will shore up your original skepticism. Right. For example, with vaccinations, they begin making claims about there's a conspiracy among pharmaceuticals, or the entire medical industry is involved in a cover-up. Like, these are much bigger than the original problem.
Right. Every doctor on the planet is out to kill your child, is basically what that is.
Right, exactly.
I love how you talk about using reality to solve the problems, and I'm wondering if we could get you to run for office, because could use some more reality out there.
I did have an idea for a humanist think tank, with the idea being that